Welcome everybody to this session about Drupal Migrate. This is a session for site builders. So just before we get started, how many of you are site builders? All of you? How many of you are also like maybe developer-ish? Yeah? A little bit? Okay, great. Excellent. So today I'm going to be talking about content migration from a site building perspective. So hopefully there'll be something for everyone. I'm going to focus on kind of the process rather than the code, but there is going to be some code, so just be ready for it. My name is Suzanne Dargachova. I work at Evolving Web in Montreal. We're a Drupal development shop, and we also run a Drupal training program. So I think some of you were at the training I did yesterday here at MidCamp. But we do training for Drupal site builders, themers, developers, and we are doing all our Drupal 8 trainings now. So we're really excited about Drupal 8. Today in this talk, I'm going to be talking about Drupal 7, just so you all know. But I think a lot of the process things I'm going to be talking about will be totally relevant for Drupal 8. Yeah, we're from Montreal, so it's fun to be in Chicago, and our first time at MidCamp, so we're really excited to be here. We design, develop, and implement Drupal sites for lots of different types of clients. And some of our clients have thousands of pages of content, and so using migration is a really obvious solution for them. But we also work with smaller clients who just need to develop a site with a few hundred pieces of content. And the Migrate module also has a role for these projects. So whatever type of site you're doing, you can consider using migrations as part of your workflow. So to get started, what is Migrate? Migrations are a way to get your content into Drupal programmatically. So rather than getting content developers or authors to write all their content directly in Drupal, it's kind of a way of scripting this so that you can pull things into your site without that manual step. There's lots of ways to get your content into Drupal. So you could hire a bunch of monkeys or interns or students to enter the content all by hand. You could use something like the feeds module, which some people use. It's good for content that's kind of updated regularly and needs to be pulled in on a regular basis. There's ways of setting up sample content on your site. So if you don't have real content yet, you could use something like the realistic dummy content module, which works with Devel to create test content. You could create a custom migration script, which I think a lot of people used to do before the Migrate module. And then Migrate gives you a way to migrate content from different types of sources, like spreadsheets or JSON files. And so you do have to write some code to get this to work, but it makes the process much easier. So you don't have to write a lot of code by hand. And so there's a lot of reasons to use the Migrate module. I think it's a best practice for site building because it allows you to verify that your site's working correctly by putting your content, by allowing you to test your content really easily. So basically you just are able to run the migration and automatically you get a bunch of content on your site. So then if you make a bunch of changes to your site building, you can run the migration again and do your testing again. So rather than having to update all your sample content each time you make a change, you're able to do this really quickly. So that's why I think it's an important thing for site builders to understand. It also streamlines content creation. So if you are getting your content authors and editors creating content earlier on in the process before your site is ready, say in a spreadsheet, it's going to be kind of easier for them to create that all up front and give you the content ready to go. And so we find, like I said, it's useful for a lot of Drupal projects, not just huge Drupal projects. So some use cases for when you might need to use Migrate. First of all, if you're upgrading an old site to Drupal, whether it's a previous version of Drupal or whether it's just a completely legacy site on a different platform, it's a great way of pulling that content in. If you're using third-party data, so if you have a set of JSON files with open source data and you want to get that into Drupal, Migrate's a great tool. And just for populating a website initially. So if you have a brand new website, I built a website recently for Trent University that lists all of their programs, and they didn't have any content to start with. And I kind of couldn't believe it when I was talking to them that they hadn't really, put together at some point in the university's history like a spreadsheet of programs, but no, it was the first time they were really thinking about this systematically. So it was a brand new website and a brand new set of content. And so, like I mentioned before, especially for populating a brand new site with content, it's really great to be able to get content authors working on this at the same time as you're building the site. So while you're creating all the views and content types, they're working madly to put together their, 500 pieces of content that they want to launch with. So you don't have to wait until the site building's done to start on content creation. I think this also helps to give clients more responsibility over the content, because if you're kind of doing all the content creation for your clients, they don't really get a sense of what their content consists of. So miscommunications can happen more easily. It also means you get to work with real content sooner. So if you're just pretending that you know what the content is going to be on the site, you'll probably make some mistakes as a site builder. Maybe you don't realize that they want to publish 10 different images for each course, or that their articles have multiple categories, not just one category. So things like this you'll realize a lot sooner as soon as you have real content. And finally, one thing that we try to do at Evolving Web is when we launch a site, we try and have a deployment process for setting up that site. So we try not to have like one version of the database that's the master version. So having your content completely separate from all the configuration of the site really helps with this. So the day you launch your site, maybe you have a Drush script that goes in and enables all your modules and your features, and then it runs migrations to get your content into Drupal. So you go from having no Drupal site to having the full Drupal site up and running. So this is kind of the goal that we aim towards with all of the sites we build. Doesn't always happen, but it's a goal to have. Okay, so how does Migrate work at a high level? So whatever situation you have, whether you're creating a new site or upgrading a site, your content has to come from somewhere. So Migrate works with different sources. So a source is where the data is coming from. So a source could be a JSON file or a spreadsheet or an existing database of content. Migrate's able to create different types of content in Drupal, and not just content as in nodes, but also other kinds of entities, so taxonomy terms and users, as well as media or whatever other types of entities you're creating. And really the most fantastic feature about Migrate, if you've ever tried to do things like this with a custom script, is that all the tools for testing, getting the content into your site, and then rolling back when you make a mistake, because of course it's not going to work perfectly the first 10 times you try. This is key, right? So testing and rolling back so you can try again. This is important. And it does require, so if you're migrating from another Drupal site, there is a way to use Migrate with a user interface. But otherwise, if you're using a source like a JSON file or a spreadsheet, then you do need to write some code. And I think this is why people shy away a bit from Migrate if they're not developers. But I'll show you the code, and it's kind of follows a pattern, so you don't need to be so afraid necessarily. Okay, so what do you need to know to use Migrate? So first of all, I think you need to know site building, because you need to know where all this content is going. You have these sources like spreadsheets and JSON files, and I mean, I love spreadsheets, so it's good to understand how that part works, but then you have to know where that content is going. So typically, like a very simple migration, you're going to be migrating content into a content type, right? So you need to be able to build a place for that content to live, and to make that match up with where the content's coming from. Secondly, you love working with and testing content. Who here loves working with and testing content? Yeah, you told me that earlier. Great, so maybe you don't, but maybe you work with people who love content and they can help you with the testing. So this is a big part of Migrate. It's not just running the migration. Like I said, it's probably going to have a problem the first 10 times you run it, so testing is really important. And yeah, I'm not scared to put together a simple module. So like I said, Migrate works with lots of different sources. So there's, options out there to migrate from. Today, just as an example, I'm going to show you migration from a CSV file. And this is just because I think everyone is familiar with CSV files. Everyone works with spreadsheets. And if you are working on a brand new site and you want your clients to create the content, a spreadsheet's nice because your client can actually, open up Excel and create the spreadsheet. Okay, so I'm going to walk through this process, and I'm going to do a demo as I go along because, yeah, it's the last session of the day. People are yawning. I want to make it fun, so we'll do a bit of a demo as we go along, and so it'll give a chance for things to go wrong and be very exciting. So for this demo, just so you know what I'm using, so you can replicate this later when you're back at your office and you're like, how did she do that again? So I'm using a custom module that I'm writing, so I'll show you the code for that as I go. But if you want to download it later, it's at bit.ly/migrate programs. I'm setting up a program content type, so I'm going to do this with you in the demo, so you'll see what this looks like. But if you ever want to import it later, I exported it using the bundle copy module. So if you install bundle copy, you can grab it here and import that on your site. And then the contrib modules I'm using, so I'm using Migrate. It's the module you need to start with. I'm using views for testing. And then bundle copy I just used to grab this content type. Okay, so the basic steps I'm going to go through today, I'm going to start off by getting my source content all ready. So this might be your client's job or your interns or your monkeys or your students or whoever you have creating the content. Then we'll prepare the site, so we'll set up the content type. We'll create the Migrate module, so I'll walk through the code that I've set up there. We'll run the migrations, and then we will test because this is important. So don't miss step number 5. Okay, so preparing our site and our content. So in terms of the destination where the content's going, we need to put our content type in place. And in terms of the source, the CSV file, we need to make sure that this corresponds to what we have in our content type. So for each column of information that we're importing, we need to have a field or a setting or somewhere for this content to go. And sometimes we'll have multi-value fields, so we'll see how to handle that. So preparing your CSV. So if you set your client to work creating content, they might come back with a CSV file that's, got 1,000 rows in it or 500 rows, and it's just so much content. And then you realize, oh shoot, I forgot to ask them for this one field. Or, oh no, the way that they formatted the content, it doesn't line up to how I actually want the content to be displayed. So be careful when you release your clients or your content producers on a spreadsheet. It's better to start off with just a few pieces of sample content. And maybe the best thing would be for you to give your client or your content creators an example of what you think the content, how you think the content is structured. So your client just tells you, okay, we have to import programs for this university. And you go think back to university and you think, okay, programs. Programs have a title, and there's usually like a program code, and there's, it could be an undergraduate program or a graduate program. So you come up with this set of fields that you think make sense, maybe given their design or just given their business needs. And you tell them, okay, this is the content I think we need to import. And then they might come back and say, well, actually, there's some extra fields you missed, and we don't really have a program code, so we can remove this field. So there might be some back and forth just at this first level with your client in terms of what the content should be. And then hopefully you'll build up a small set of sample content that you can use to create the migration. So just to get started before you try migrating a ton of content, start with just a few pieces. And then the next step is to set up your content type. So here I have a program, a set of program content, and I have for each program a title, a body, a program level, so undergraduate, graduate, a program type, an image. The image has an alt text too, so I'm going to have to migrate that in, and then some tags, so that's going to use a taxonomy field. So the actual site I did this for, there were a bunch more fields, but this is just a simplified version. And then the next step is kind of to set up your content type to match those columns. So for each column that I have that I want to import, the title, the body, the program level, each of those is going to be a field in my program content type. So for the title and body, these are just standard Drupal fields. For the type and level, I want to make them list text fields. So if somebody goes in later, they can change the level. For the image, it's an image field with an alt text because I know I want to migrate the alt text into Drupal. And for the tags, it's just the standard tags field that comes by default with the article content type. So I just copied that over to this content type. So I'm just trying to make sure that these line up, the source columns with the destination fields. Okay, so let's do this. You're all site builders. You can help me out. We're going to create our program content type. So I'm going to go in, add my content type. So I'm going to keep track of the names I use for everything. Because remember, we're going to write our migration, and we're going to be writing some code. So we have to tell Drupal later on what content type we want to migrate into and what fields we want to migrate into. So all these little machine names that Drupal is creating, these are used in our database. So this is our destination for all of these bits of content. So I'm just going to keep track of this as a mental note that my program content type is just called program. So I'll go ahead and start adding my fields. So I have title and body all set up. Those are my first two columns. Then I have the program level. So I know later on I just want to have a list of levels for authors to choose from. So I'm going to make this a list text field. And then I'm just put in undergraduate, graduate. And just take note, sometimes when you're setting up a list text field, you use a key and then a value that are different. In this case, they're exactly the same. But what is stored in the database, it's the key, right? It's the first one here. Sometimes people like to use numbers instead of text, or maybe a shorter version or something. So remember, this is what's actually going to be the value that I used, that I want to match up with the values in my spreadsheet. So undergraduate, graduate here. So if I was using some sort of code for undergraduate, graduate, or numbers instead, I would want that to be used in the value in the spreadsheet. So I'll just save that. Program, the next one over is program type. So same thing here, I'm going to put a list text field. Maybe the university's given me a whole list of program types to pick from, things like full-time, part-time, co-op program. What else? What other kind of programs are there?
Summer school?
Summer school, I don't know. I'm leaving this up to the content lovers to take care of. Click save. And I've got this all set up. So again, I have my keys and values. So this is what's going to go in the spreadsheet. And finally, I have my image field. So I can import images as well. Program image. So note the machine names here: program level, program type, program image. And I'll set this up as an image field. And because I want to also have an alt text, I just have to make sure in the configuration for the field that I select alt text. Okay, and then the last one, I want to have a tags field. So I'm just going to reuse the article tags field. So I can migrate in tags as well for each program. Does this all look good? Do you think this lines up? Remember, this is a live demo, so there might be problems. I'm counting on you, site builders.
I was going to ask about the alt text for the images. Where does that, or is that another step then?
Yeah.
Figure out what the field name would be for that.
Right. Yeah. So it's not a separate field. It's like a property of the image field.
All right.
So when you migrate in some fields, like if you think of a link field can have two parts. Sometimes it has a URL and it has the link text. So you can have a separate source for each part of the field. So if I also wanted a link for each program, which actually this university does have a link, I just didn't put this, it would have the link, could have the link title and then the link URL. Okay, great. So I've got my content type set up. So my next step is to try creating the module. So in actual fact, I'm presenting this as these sequential steps where you create the spreadsheet and then you create the content type and then you write the module. But of course, you end up iterating back through all these steps in real life. Okay, so creating our module. So we're going to set up a module. It's going to have this Migrate file that has the program's migration in it. So most of what we're writing is in here. And then there's a module file that just tells Drupal basically, I'm setting up a migration. There's an info file. So if you've ever created a theme or a module before, this just tells Drupal about your module. And then there's an install file that just registers your migration. And then we also have some source files. These don't necessarily have to live in your module. In fact, maybe they shouldn't, but just for now, we're going to put the program images and the CSV file with our programs data in there as well. So the info file, who here's made an info file before? Oh, most of you, great. So this is just telling Drupal, hey, I have a module, here's what it's called, it's for Drupal 7, I need to use the Migrate module, so make sure that's installed, and then I'm just telling Drupal here that I have this other file where my migration is defined. So that's kind of the only special thing about this file. Then I have my module code. So this is what goes in the module folder. And here it says implement hook migrate API. So I'm telling Drupal, hey, Migrate API, I have a migration that I want to run, and it's called Migrate Programs. So if you're creating a migration, you can use pretty much the same code, and you're just going to swap out Migrate Programs with, Migrate. What are you migrating? I should have asked earlier. What are you migrating?
Right now I'm working on migrating the taxonomy, so I guess I'd name it after that.
Right, so you could say migrate tags or migrate categories. There's also a thing going on here with groups. So you can group your migrations together. So if you have categories for your programs, you can migrate the programs and the categories together and add them to the same group. So I have a group here, but there's really just one thing I'm migrating. So you could have another migration that you add underneath programs for your categories and just swap out the name programs with categories. So the one important thing here to kind of look at is that I have this class name. So I'm creating a migration of programs, and the class name is Migrate Programs. And when I actually create the code for the migration, this is kind of at the core of what my little module does. I want to use that class name Migrate Programs again. And this says that Migrate Programs extends migration. So this is because there's a whole bunch of stuff that the Migrate module does that lets you import the content and then roll back to undo your import. And so by extending migration here, you're taking advantage of all that functionality. So this code here goes in my Migrate Programs Migrate Inc. file that I've set up for this migration. So I might have more than one migration going on, but this will just define migration for the program content type. There's some comments here because we're going to fill in a bunch of code that does all the work for us, but I just wanted to kind of show you the template for creating the code for a migration. So here you're just basically telling Migrate that you want to use all the migration functionality, and you're giving your migration a description. And so in this code, the blanks we're going to fill in, we're going to tell Migrate sort of how to identify the content, so where the content's, and then we're going to tell Migrate where the content is coming from, the source. We're going to tell Migrate where to put the content, so in the program content type. And then we're going to map the two together. So we're going to tell Migrate how to map our source columns with our destination fields. And then there's a little bit of code that I'll explain later on that transforms some of our content. that's in this separate prepare row function. So the first bit of code that I'm going to fit in here, this is where I'm going to tell Migrate how to identify the content. So one nice thing, like I mentioned before, with the Migrate module is that you can migrate in a bunch of content, and then you can roll back that migration. And what lets Migrate roll back is that it has a way to identify everything you've imported. And so it has to have some unique way of identifying content. And this could be anything, right? This could be an ID that you give the content, or it could be text. But it has to be something that's unique. So sometimes it's hard to find something unique in your content because you have content that has, maybe two pieces of content that have the same title or have the same other values in the columns. So here I've just created an ID for all my content, so there's sure to be a unique identifier. And the first thing that I tell Migrate is I want to use this ID in the first column of my spreadsheet. I want to use that to identify it. So when you roll back, if Migrate created program 1, roll back program 1. Next, what I want to do is to tell Migrate where the fields are coming from. So all this stuff that I want to import into Drupal, where should Migrate find it? And because I'm using a CSV as the source, I want to tell Drupal which column in the CSV file corresponds to the fields that I have. So I kind of identify each column here, and this is an array. So usually in arrays, when we're working with arrays, the 0 is corresponding to the first column in the array. People kind of get this? Does this ring a bell? Computer Science 101, arrays. Great. So we have the first column here is column 0, and so this corresponds to my ID. Column 1 corresponds to my title, and so on. So I'm just kind of mapping the columns to, basically I'm just giving the columns names that I can use later on in the migration. And so this is useful because you might have a giant CSV and you don't want to migrate in all the columns. Maybe you're using some CSV somebody put together a long time ago and it has extra values that you just don't need. So rather than telling Drupal to pull in all the columns, you can really identify which ones you need for your migration. So then the next thing I add to my migration is I want to tell Drupal where to get the programs from. So where is the source? Where is the CSV coming from? So I tell the migration, hey, the source is going to be a CSV file, and this is where I choose that I'm using a CSV file as the source. If you were using a JSON file, you could put migrate source JSON in here. And then you give Drupal the path to your CSV file. So in our case, it's just the programs.csv, and we put it right in our module. Then we pass it the list of columns that we just created in the previous step. So our CSV columns, we tell Drupal which columns we need from that CSV file. And then we can also tell Drupal to skip certain rows. So if you have one row of column headers in your CSV file, you obviously don't want to import that, right? You don't want Drupal to create a program from all your labels up here. So you might have a couple rows that you want to skip, so you just update the number there. And then I need to tell Drupal where to put the content. So I create a destination, and in this case, I'm creating nodes, right? Each of my programs is a node. So I put migrate destination node, And I tell Drupal the name of my content type. So that machine name program that we kept track of earlier, that's what I'm going to put in here. And then the only option I need to worry about right now is that I want the language to be undefined, because this site, luckily, it's just in one language, makes my life easier. And then I want to use the full HTML text format. So we've told Drupal about the source, we've told Drupal about the destination, and now we map the two together. So for each field in your content type, you have a machine name, right? If you look back at the content type page, we had field program level as the machine name for the program level field. So we just map these field names to the names that we gave our columns back in this code where we identified the columns of the CSV file. And this can be a little confusing because the destination is on the left and the source is on the right. So you might find this like a little bit backwards in your head, but just remember the first thing you put is the destination and then you put the source. For some things you might not need to grab the content from the CSV. For example, if you always want the author to be user 1, then you can just set a default value instead. And so this should mostly make sense, I think. We're mapping one-to-one the destination and the source, except for the image, which is a little bit more complicated, right? Because we don't just have one value for the image. We have the source, so where to grab the image from, the source dir. And then we also have the alt text. So we have separate value for the source of the image, like the name of the image, in the folder where we put our images, and the alt text itself.
Where would you find the machine? So source dir is a machine name. How would you find that if you didn't know what it was called?
Good question. So yeah, the machine name is field program image, but then how do you know what the name of this property is? That's a great question. How would you know? There's some documentation, right?
Yeah.
So me, when I learned this, I mean, I was, of course, Googling online, but there's great example modules that come with the Migrate module. So if you open up the module, you'll see there's two samples in there, and they have examples of everything you can imagine.
Like
well, not everything you can imagine, but like a lot of stuff. So you can look there for examples, and then there's documentation. And then, okay, so then we have our tags. I'm telling the migration here to create a new term when it comes across the tags, and to ignore the case. So if people use different cases, uppercase, lowercase, it should still work. And then the final thing, there's just one last little piece of code that I'm adding. It's to implement the prepare row function, and I'm just telling the migration when it comes across the tags, when it's importing the tags, that I'm separating the tags by a comma. So this is going to turn that list of tags that I had in the spreadsheet this is going to turn this into an array. So rather than just be a string with a bunch of commas in it, it's going to be an array that can be parsed into individual tags. And same thing with my program type, because I set up my program type to be multi-valued. Did I set up my program type to be multi-valued?
I saw you did. It was unlimited. Yeah, I was watching.
Thank you. See, site builders.
But would this actually work? Because you actually, those are delimited by a comma and a space. So would you actually need to make the explode comma followed by a space for this to work with that data? Because with feeds that would matter. I don't know with Migrate if it's that literal. That one cares.
That's a good question.
Well, you try it first without the space, and then if it doesn't work, you do another iteration. So.
Yeah, it's not going to trim the space automatically, so you're going to end up with your terms having a space at the beginning.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. Okay. We can go fix this because we're doing a live demo.
Uh-oh.
This is next. Review the Migrate Programs module. So we're going to fix this. Okay, so I'm going to actually have this right open here. So I'm going to show you first the migration code is in here. So this is how it all fits together. So everything we were looking at, like identifying the ID as the unique identifier for the content, defining our destination, setting up the list of CSV columns and identifying them, identifying the source, so the program's CSV, and then doing all the mapping. So all of this goes into our migration, and then we have this little function down here to convert our tags and our program types into comma separated or into arrays. So I'm going to go back to my program CSV, and I'm just going to fix my content because I don't have very much content, so it's easy to fix. So I'm just going to take out the spaces.
So technically, Suzanne was correct. It was the content that was wrong.
I've been known to just
Oh
change
yeah,
the content.
it's always the content that's
Sometimes
wrong.
it's easier to find and replace in Excel than change your
It didn't even occur to me to change the code.
It's the difference between a site builder and a developer.
Right there.
It wouldn't even occur to the developer to change the content.
Right.
Okay, great. So I think I'm set. So I've reviewed my code. I go back to my slides. So now we are ready to run the migration because we have the content type, we have the migration module. So we can do this either through Drush, which is the preferred way to do things, or through the Migrate UI. So there is a UI module that you can turn on that will also be available. There's a whole set of Drush commands you can use for working with migrations. So you can use these commands to import programs, roll back programs, which you will have to do many times. If you have a lot of content that you're migrating, you might want to stop the migration because you realize there's a problem. So all these commands, and then it's documented on Drupal.org, so you can look at that in more detail. So what I'm going to do now on my site, because I have the content type and I have the module, but I need to install the module. So I'll go over here and turn this on. And then I'm going to use the UI to run the migration. So if you are using the UI, it's under Content Migrate. And with the UI, you can do a lot of what you can do with Drush. So you can roll back, import, stop. And the nice thing about Drush is that you're going to see more of the error messages that appear when you run the migration and there's problems. So here it's just going to tell me, okay, I created 4 programs, which is what we expected because we had these 4 columns, or sorry, 4 rows in our spreadsheet. But it'll tell you if any of them failed. So you might see that one of them failed, and then you can figure out which one failed and look in your content to find out why, or look in your code, or look in both. So it looks like it's succeeded. And so now if I go back to my site, I can see the content I created. And what I would suggest doing is, you can review the content, of course, by just going to the content overview page, but it's much better to create some views, even if you're just in the initial phases of building your site and you don't know how the content's going to be used yet. Creating a view will let you review better how the content is actually appearing in Drupal. So if there's like formatting problems because you didn't import the right text format, or if the images just didn't get imported because you pointed to the wrong spot, or if you used, JPEG instead of PNG for all the image formats, you're going to see right away the problems with your content. So this is a really important part of the process. And even if you've sort of identified as site builders, a lot of you, so maybe you're not working on migrations yourself. You're working with developers, so maybe they're the ones writing all the migrations, but you probably will still be the ones doing the testing. And so making sure you're looking at the content and identifying problems is really key to this process. So like I said, you can use views, testing a sampling of the content to make sure it's appearing correctly. And then you can roll back the migrations and try again. So other things to test for. Sometimes in your content type, you'll have identified certain fields as being required. So you want to make sure that these fields are actually present in the content that's being migrated. Otherwise, once your site is launched, people will try and edit the content, and they won't be able to save the content without filling in those fields. So that's a really important part of the testing. Making sure that things like images and files are the right size. If they're the wrong, if you're expecting things in a certain proportion from your content providers, making sure that they're giving you the content like that matches what you expect. Values for select fields that don't match the allowed values. So when I set up the select field for undergraduate, graduate for the different program levels, that matched the values that were in the spreadsheet. But if they don't match, then you're going to have some missing data. Text that's too long or too short for the design. So this is something that you're going to find out more when you're actually in the process of getting the theme and the design in place. But since you're migrating the content, this is probably the point where you'll figure this out. And yeah, there could be lots of other problems that you find with the content. We could go on all day.
I have a quick question about that.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of error handling? Like, is that, if it fails, will you get an error message that lets you know why? Or
there are errors.
Are they, how readable are they? I guess that's what I'm curious about. You know what I mean? Or does it point me to like a bunch of code that I'll have to dissect and figure out what the error is?
Yeah, it kind of depends on
What the error
is.
Okay.
But I found it hard to figure out without reviewing the content.
Yeah. Okay.
As sort of like a non-developer.
Does it give you like line 2, column 3? Like how much investment? How does it point?
No, not necessarily, because it might just tell you that only 16 out of 17 of your pieces of content were migrated, and then you'll go and see which one of them failed, and then you can figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah, in the dashboard there, next to the migration, there's a number of messages column.
Okay.
And if there are messages, you can click on a link that lists the messages
Okay.
and tells you which source ID.
Okay, that's
triggered
what I'm
them.
going for. So at least
Yeah.
it gives you like somewhere to kind of go with it.
Yeah.
I mean,
How
it'll
good
tell
the
me what-
messages are depends
probably
on
pretty
what
terrible,
through the
but at
message.
least if it tells me the source ID, that's like a little more helpful than just being like, it failed.
Yeah, so if you click on the group into the individual migrations, then you see that messages column there.
Okay, cool. And it might not, if it gives you the source ID, that's more helpful. Cool.
Although it should be noted that all the things that Suzanne showed were things that Migrate was not going to throw an error at. Those are like the, aside from
Yeah,
Migrate
no,
messages, here's the
everything-
things that look good to it, might not be good
It's
to
a
you.
perfect migration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and
That's true.
The stuff, nothing, I wouldn't expect an error from any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just was curious, like how much will it give me to go on if it doesn't work?
It's fairly reasonable.
Okay. Just, yeah, we're almost done because it's almost the end of the time. So sorry, I'm probably not leaving much time for questions, but I'll just do this quickly. So a couple more things. So I covered just the most basic possible content type, right? One image and a couple fields. But there are many types of fields out there that you might want to migrate. And so just some more examples. So for the image field, I kind of showed you how that would work with a source and then the alt text. For taxonomy terms also, there was it was a little bit different than just a text field. So some other examples of this, things like files. Files work pretty much the same as images. Links are really similar to images as well, because you can have a title and a URL attribute. So you can use :title, :URL. Entity reference fields can point to another migration. So if you have courses and programs and you want each course to reference a program, or maybe programs reference a list of courses, you can create a field and add a reference to another migration in that field. So your field will reference the unique identifier of the piece of content in the other migration. So if you're migrating a list of courses, and maybe you have an intro to engineering course that needs to reference the engineering program, then the value is going to be 2, because you're referencing this from the course's content. And then there's a module called Migrate Extras that's helpful if you're migrating other types that are kind of more obscure, so that could be useful. And for all of these, like I said, I'm putting this mini example module. I put the code up on Dropbox, but if you're looking for more examples that have a lot more code that you can look at with examples of more things, though the example modules that come with Migrate are really good documentation.
Can you set node properties like published to the homepage through Migrate also?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah?
Can you populate the unique key ID fields in the Drupal database? For example, if you're migrating a bunch of users and from one Drupal site to another, you want to retain the same UIDs for the users, can you move that over?
You can, right? Right?
For nodes and users, you can. The Drupal 7 APIs don't support that for terms or other types of content.
Oh.
But you can for nodes and UID if you set the isNew field to 1 to true.
Nice. Yeah.
If you want to reference an entity that's already on your Drupal site, or you're gonna add it later in the migration process? Is that possible?
Okay, if it's already on your Drupal site and you know the node ID, then the value, or like if it's a node, if you're referencing a node, then you could use that as the value. But if it's if it doesn't exist yet, if you're creating something that doesn't exist yet, then you can use a function in your migration to create a stub of the content.
Oh, okay, yeah, I've seen that.
You've seen that? I'm trying to think.
Not for site builders session.
Yeah, not for site builders.
Big site builder.
That's a great question though. Yeah. So again, look in the example modules for that. Yeah.
How much of this is moved to Drupal 8?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So Migrate for Drupal 8 has totally changed. Not useful at all. So, well, what do you have to do that's the same? Most of your tasks, well, building the content types, creating the content, this is the same, right? But it's the code for the actual, to integrate with migrations has changed. So.
Everything's different but the code. But the code, for the most part, will be YAML instead of PHP. Okay?
And are there good examples yet for Migrate in Drupal 8? Did they have a
There's
YAML?
there's a Migrate Plus module, which has a port of the Migrate example module from Drupal 7.
Uh-huh.
And so that walks you through the basics.
And that's because Migrate itself has been moved to Drupal 8.
Yeah, it's part of core now. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Right, but the tools are still in country.
I see. Oh, interesting.
You know, it's just the framework itself that's in core.
Oh, okay.
So you'll have to wait for Suzanne's session for Migrate for site builders for Drupal 8.
Next year.
Maybe not yet. Okay, great. Well, thanks all for attending, and thank you, Mike Ryan and Alex, for answering questions.